Good evening, folks, and a hearty welcome to our drive-in theater.
Keelan Cole with his third touchdown.
Defender Josh Norman to his backside.
All right. Hey, everybody. Welcome to episode 2 of the brand new YouTube series, Pulp Fantasy, brought to you by In Between Media. I'm your host, Scott Rinear. You can find me mostly on Twitter at MunderDiflinFF. It's also some variation of that as my username on various other social media platforms. Check me out. And we'd love it if you would go and subscribe to In Between Media's YouTube page. We've got some really exciting stuff coming up. So without further ado, let's get into it.
Now I want to dance. I want to win. I want that trophy.
So if you were here for the first episode of Pulp Fantasy, I covered Shawshank Redemption and I covered the Christmas party episode of The Office. And just as a little bit of a recap, what I do on this show is I take movies and TV, I find characters and I find scenes or situations and I compare it to various times in NFL and fantasy football history up to and including current events. So on this episode, episode 2, I'm going to be talking about Game of Thrones. I'm going to be talking about Indiana Jones and the Last Crusade. And I will finish with a comparison involving the 1994 movie Clerks, which I'm hoping is a popular one. I know a lot of people like that movie. Starting with Game of Thrones. Now, this is a bit of a Band-Aid rip-off moment for me personally, and you'll see as I go through this comparison what I mean. I hope after this one's over, my objectivity with this form of entertainment is absolutely clear, because this one is uncomfortable. So, starting with Game of Thrones, we are in season 4, episode 8. So episode 38 overall. The name of the episode is The Mountain and the Viper. And I should probably say this, I got a little bit of pushback on this last time for Shawshank Redemption, even though the movie's decades old. Spoiler alert. There are spoiler alerts throughout this YouTube series. I'm going to be talking about plots of movies and TV shows. So this is about Game of Thrones. So spoiler alert if you haven't seen it. I'm going to be talking about the episode The Mountain and the Viper, which aired on June 1st, 2014. Real quick, in this episode, Cersei chooses the Mountain, Sir Gregor, to be her champion in the trial by combat for the life of Tyrion Lannister. Tyrion selects Oberyn Martell, also known as the Red Viper, to fight on his behalf in this trial by combat. Oberyn is played by Pedro Pascal, who is also known for playing, actually, I'm not going to spoil that for you. So, during the fight, there comes a point when the audience, myself included, is pretty sure Oberyn's going to win the battle, only to have him lose at the last second by having his skull absolutely crushed by the hands of the Mountain, Sir Gregor. The moment that Sir Gregor has Oberyn's head in his grasp, you know that things have turned. You know the tide has turned, and the man that was on the brink of victory is now going to lose. So, there was a moment like this in the NFL. Approximately 120 days after the air date of this episode, on February 1st, 2015, in this trial by combat, the two champions were the Seahawks and the Patriots. The moment in this comparison when the audience probably assumed the Seahawks were going to win was following a couple of different plays. One was Jermaine Kearse making the most forgotten best catch probably in NFL history, followed by Marshawn Lynch being tackled at the 1-yard line and Bill Belichick inexplicably not calling a timeout and letting it run down to about 20-odd seconds. Goal to go at the 1 to win the Super Bowl, 20-odd seconds left. This is the Oberyn Martell Red Viper moment when everybody is assuming Oberyn's going to win the battle. However, Sir Gregor, in this case, Malcolm Butler's interception, is that counter moment when Sir Gregor's hands are grasping the head of Oberyn. Malcolm Butler's interception. In this version of this scene, the NFL version, I did not actually get to see the end and the end result because I was in my yard crying. So that is my first comparison, a bit of a quick hit. By the way, I did finally watch that interception, the replay of that interception for the first time during the 2020 season. I have yet to watch the replay of the actual scene from the Mountain and the Viper in Game of Thrones, and I probably never will.
Can your little birds get a message to the good masters of Astapor?
My second comp on this second episode of Pulp Fantasy involves the movie Indiana Jones and the Last Crusade, starring Harrison Ford and Sean Connery. As with most movies, this one starts with River Phoenix playing a young Indiana Jones, chasing down probably the cheesiest piece of treasure in the entire franchise of this movie. I was a big fan of all the different artifacts and treasures and everything that were sought out in these movies until it got to this dollar store gold cheesy cross. Anyway, R.I.P. River Phoenix, you left us too soon. So fast forward, Indiana Jones is a grown-ass man and his dad goes missing, again played by Sean Connery, in his search for the Holy Grail. So Indiana Jones picks up the trail where his dad left off in order to try and find his missing dad. He joins forces with Elsa, played by Alison Doody. They fight some bad guys, somehow convince a sweet old librarian that he's going insane. They swim around in the sewer. He gets a book signed by Hitler. He ends up finding his dad in a castle, and then soon after that finds out that they are both Eskimo brothers. And kind of finishes up with apparently what the Germans are after is a map, a specific map that Sean Connery had made in the course of his career in seeking of the Holy Grail. Specifically, this map was a map with no names, which to me sounds pretty useless, but I digress. They take a blimp ride together, no ticket.
No ticket.
And yada, yada, yada. They find themselves in a cave after getting through some booby traps that I could only describe as the rated PG-13 version of the movie Goonies.
Poor God.
And there's a really, really old guy who looks really, really bored that they come across when they get to the end of this tunnel. Then comes the climax, where choosing the correct grail amongst the ridiculous amount of options is the end goal. The protagonist, Walter Donovan, played by Julian Glover, selfishly wants the first sip out of the Holy Grail. So Elsa purposely chooses the wrong cup because she's all about that Indiana. Donovan drinks from the cup. Now, I'm going to skip away from The Last Crusade for one moment, and I'm going to move to a fantasy football comparison that I know everybody will love, because from what I gather, everybody loves when other people talk about the specifics of their fantasy team and their fantasy team's success or lack thereof. So we're going to go back in time. 2011, week 17. I get it. I should not have been playing a championship in week 17. It's 2011. It's 10 years ago. Give me a break. So I don't remember every player from my opponent's team. I don't remember every player from my team. What I do remember is I was faced with a decision before that game. I was deciding between starting Tim Tebow as my starting quarterback or Matt Flynn in week 17 with Aaron Rodgers not playing. So I chose Tim Tebow. He had been kind of scrapping his way to some good games for me over the course of the last few weeks, and I went with Tebow. Matt Flynn went on to throw for 480 yards and 6 touchdowns, which is 55.2 fantasy points in 6-point passing touchdown leagues, 43.2 fantasy points in 4-point passing per touchdown leagues. Tim Tebow was 6 of 22 for 60 passing yards, 1 pick, and 6 rushes for 16 yards. That's 2 fantasy points, and it doesn't really matter how many points touchdown passes are worth. 2 fantasy points. I ended up losing my championship by 5 points. Now, we're going to skip right back to Indiana Jones and the Last Crusade to the moment most people know. As soon as Donovan drinks out of the wrong rail, he quickly gets really, really old, turns into a skeleton, and basically explodes into dust. And then the classic line by the old dude who still looks really bored, he chose poorly.
He chose poorly.
Anytime I think back to that championship decision in week 17, 2011. That is the quote from the movie that comes to mind. So I'm starting off with two very painful comparisons, I realize, but again, objectivity is the name of the game. So on to the third and final comparison of this week's Pulp Fantasy. Okay, for the third and final comparison, episode 2, Pulp Fantasy, I'm going to talk about the 1994 movie Clerks, one of my favorite, just kind of old school movies. I'll watch it anytime it's on. It was written and directed by Kevin Smith, or K. Smitty, as me and the rest of his closest friends call him. It was done on a $27,000 budget, which is pretty cheap. And in 2021 dollars, that is, let's see, still really cheap. And the thing about the movie that I love is that really shows, but in a really good way. I thought it was a beautifully done movie. So we've got the main character, Dante, and his at least adjacent coworker, Randall Graves. Dante works at the Quick Stop grocery. Randall works next door at a really crappy video store. One thing I really like about this movie, side note, is the way it starts. It starts with him just waking up in his closet. No explanation needed. He wakes up in his closet to find out he has to go into work, even though he closed the night before. So he goes into work, and this movie is really just all about a kind of a crappy work day at a crappy job. What I want to point out in this movie is one of the classic quotes from this movie, and it's, "I'm not even supposed to be here today." I say it all the time. I use it all the time. People that haven't seen Clerks look at me like I have no idea what I'm talking about. So I thought it would be interesting. How many times is that quote used in the movie? So what I did as part of my research for this YouTube series is I watched Clerks. So I'm right where I want to be. So here we go. I'm going to list that. At 11 minutes, 28 seconds in, when talking to his first girlfriend of the movie, Veronica, he says, "I'm not even supposed to be here today."
Not even supposed to be here today.
At 34 minutes, 32 seconds, there's a guy in the store that's looking for a perfect carton of eggs and doing a bunch of weird stuff with the eggs. And before he's going to call the cops, Dante says, "I'm not even supposed to be here today."
I give him 5 more minutes. After that, I'm calling the cops. I don't need this. I'm not even supposed to be here today.
41 minutes, 9 seconds. He finds out that the guy he ended up filling in for, that's supposed to be back by noon so he can play hockey at 2, actually went to Vermont and he has to work till close. And he says, "I'm not even supposed to be here today." 46 minutes, 59 seconds in, they realize they only have one roller hockey ball. And Dante says, "I'm not even supposed to be here today."
I'm not even supposed to be here today.
1 hour, 26 minutes, 24 seconds in, after fighting with Randall all over the store, he says, "You know what the real tragedy is? I'm not even supposed to be here today."
I'm not even supposed to be here today.
And a lot of people might think that's it. That's the 5 times. However, there's a 6th. 1 hour, 26 minutes, 45 seconds in, Randall says, "I'm not even supposed to be here today."
I'm not even supposed to be here today. You sound like an asshole.
Imitating Dante. So there you go. 6 instances of "I'm not even supposed to be here today." So what we're going to do now is we're going to flash forward to week 12 of the 2020 NFL season. Jeff Driscoll tests positive for COVID-19 early in the week. Denver Broncos think, "That's fine. We have 3 other quarterbacks." However, 3 other quarterbacks apparently didn't honor the mask protocols when hanging out with Jeff Driscoll. So on Saturday, a day before the game, they get put into the COVID-19 quarantine protocol. So they do not have a quarterback. Now, in my opinion, this game should have then been canceled. However, it wasn't. And the enviable task of quarterbacking the Denver Broncos against the New Orleans Saints defense went to none other than Kendall Hinton, a wide receiver pretty much from the practice squad, who ended up being the emergency QB for the Denver Broncos. Kendall Hinton ended up being the first non-quarterback to play any kind of significant snaps in the NFL since Tom Matt for the Baltimore Colts in 1965. Hinton went 1 for 9 for 13 yards, 1 completed pass to Noah Fant, threw 2 picks, 2 rushes, 7 yards. Hinton did end up on a top 10 list after this one game. I was looking at it on Pro Football Reference. I went to fantasy points and I went to total PPR fantasy points, and I clicked it twice, so it started from the smallest. Hinton was the leader in lowest amount of fantasy points this year at -2.8. So this comparison is Hinton with a resounding, I'm not even supposed to be here today. Now, he didn't say that. I have a lot of respect for Kendall Hinton. I tweeted at him that I had some respect for him because he took it in stride. He thanked everybody for the opportunity. He didn't complain one time. However, it's a glaring I'm not supposed to be here today example for me. There you have it. Those are my 3 comps on episode 2 of Pulp Fantasy. We covered Game of Thrones, we covered Indiana Jones and the Last Crusade, and we covered Clerks. I appreciate everybody watching. Again, I'm at Munder Difflin, FF on Twitter. We would love it if you subscribe to the In Between Media YouTube page. Got a lot of fun stuff coming up. There's articles, columns up on In Between Media you can read. So until next time, that's all I got. I'll see you later.